Here's a scary fact. People driving on regional and remote roads are at greater risk.
2/3 of road fatalities in Australia occur on rural roads.
The leading causes: speed, fatigue and drunk driving.
Research tells us that city and country people are more likely to break the road rules on country roads.
So, what can you do?
Take the pledge to choose road safety
And live the pledge.
Head to arsf.com.au to find out more. Hi, I'm Russell White, CEO and founder of the Australian Road Safety Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for Rural Road Safety Month. This webinar is intended to raise awareness on the alarming statistics and highlight the need for a greater focus for road safety in rural and remote areas. Today you're going to hear from some very special guests as they share their insights and personal stories, and together with them, the Australian Road Safety Foundation want to implore all our community to take action against this tragic and preventable issue. To mark Rural Road Safety Month, which runs all the way through August, the Australian Road Safety Foundation has released brand new research that looks at dangerous driving behaviour and the importance of further education to save lives on our roads right around the country. Tragically, 835 people lost their lives on rural roads last year, and despite smaller population numbers, these rural road fatalities made up 2/3 of last year's national road toll. This fatality rate per population is over 3 times in rural areas compared to major cities. This statistic is only what we know from an on-road perspective. Many fatal and serious injury crashes in rural and remote areas are not recorded in official road crash data, including crashes on private property. In fact, 71% of farm fatalities involve a vehicle, and these incidents are also not recorded in the national road toll. This adds even further weight to the challenges we face to improve safety in rural Australia. Research conducted by the Australian Road Safety Foundation revealed that both metro and regional drivers admit to being more likely to break a road rule in rural areas compared to city streets and highways. And when it came to the reasons for that increase in risky behaviour on rural roads, sadly, not getting caught was the most common response. And it was actually the most prevalent amongst regional drivers. Worryingly, speed is still the number one dangerous driving act that all Australians are prepared to risk on rural roads compared to city streets. It's actually more metro drivers who wrongly believe that rural roads are safer than city streets and motorways compared to their country counterparts. Added to this, 47% of metro drivers believe that more road fatalities occurred in city areas compared to just 34% of rural drivers. Metro drivers feel that it was higher speeds that create the greatest risks on rural roads, whereas local regional drivers were more likely to recognise the impact of increased hazards like fallen branches, wildlife and fatigue. Specific to rural drivers, we found that speed and fatigue, as well as drink driving, are the top 3 dangerous driving behaviours that are more likely to impact rural drivers compared to metro drivers. The research also tells us that there are dangers beyond the driver's seat that are creating added risks in rural areas. In fact, regional residents are more likely to ride bicycles and scooters without a helmet, as well as ride them after having a few drinks. With the impact of COVID-19 bringing fewer vehicles to our roads, our research currently shows that road users are taking increased levels of risks, which are making our roads even more dangerous. So it's imperative that we don't become complacent just because there might be less vehicles on the road right now. The reality is that any time a risk is taken behind the wheel, you are putting the lives of every motorist, passenger, cyclist and pedestrian who's around you at greater risk. There is an immense cost associated with road trauma. Since records commenced in 1925, there have been more than 190,000 deaths on Australian roads, and every year another 1,200 people are killed. For every fatality, between 20 and 30 people are seriously injured. This results in a massive social and emotional cost. And on top of that, there's also an economic cost of road crashes in Australia, which is currently estimated to be around $31 billion per annum. Today I'm going to be joined by Australian Road Safety Foundation's partners, road safety advocates and first responders to gather insight and personal experience on the impact of road trauma. Our first speaker is Pat Conaghan. He's the federal member for Cowper. He was born and raised in beautiful Kempsey, and he's practiced law for the past 18 years and actually ran his own law practice for around 16 years. Before that, he was a dedicated police officer, working in both Kempsey for a number of years as well as Sydney, and ultimately building up to becoming a detective. He's a police prosecutor for the final 4 years of his career with the prosecuting branch in New South Wales. In addition to being an MP, Pat also chairs the Australian Government's Joint Select Committee on Road Safety, a bipartisan committee tasked with examining the effectiveness of the existing road safety programs and support services. And I'm pleased to say Pat joins us on the line now. Pat, great to see you. I mentioned in your introduction about your commitment to road safety and also your history as a police officer. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of those experiences and I guess what your general summary of that time in your career would be.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Russell. It's good to see you again too. Look, I had 12 years in the New South Wales Police, straight out of school effectively, and was stationed back in Kempsey. And we're talking 30 years ago now, so the roads weren't quite what they were, or the highway wasn't quite what it is today. Unfortunately, I saw numerous fatalities. I started my student police officer term the day after the Kempsey bus crash, and then was posted back to Kempsey, or the Clybucca bus crash. Not to mention, the countless accidents I went to. What it really showed me was that this wasn't just about one person or the people that were killed in the accident. It was about vulnerable people. It was about the children, and it was about the first responders as well, the AMBOs, the police, the SES who attended, and in particular with the Kempsey bus crash, I saw over the next few years, colleague after colleague, just fall by the wayside, the impact that had on not only them. I saw marriages break down. It was just a waterfall effect from what they had seen on that one occasion. So over the years, as you know, I was a detective and a police prosecutor and then a lawyer. What I saw, or what I didn't see, was change. And I didn't get into politics for that particular reason, but when the opportunity presented itself to work with the Office of Road Safety, I grasped it with both hands. It was extremely important to me to work on that because of what I've seen, because of the post-traumatic stress that I've seen with former colleagues, and just the totality of the road toll year after year, which seems to be socially acceptable.
And you're right. There's something that I think if we look at other industries or other aspects of safety, there's a huge push to change that. And if we look at aviation, for example, there's a zero tolerance or an aiming for zero there. And you're right. Even though we've had improvements in cars and road design and enforcement, all those things, we still haven't really made that big cultural change. What sort of drivers do you think might be almost behind that? Are we just too complacent?
Look, I think there is an element of complacency. You get your licence when you're 16 and you're never tested again until you're in your 80s. There needs to be this re-education, and especially with, and I don't want to pigeonhole groups, but young men, 18 to 25 represent the largest proportion of road users who are killed on our roads. And I think what we're doing now is approaching it on a national level rather than perhaps a disjointed level through the states and the territories. And that's part of the Road Safety Committee's function, and also the Office of Road Safety to look at the four pillars: the safe roads, safe speed, safe people, and safe vehicles. And I think it's a really good initiative and something we have to push very hard to continue in the future.
You're 100% right. I think that there does have to be a national leadership position on it. Certainly the states and local governments, everyone has that role to play, but I think you're right. Having something like the Office of Road Safety start to become more engaged at a national level, obviously, and that creation of that office has been, a uniting front in terms of getting a national approach to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly has, and I was fortunate enough to go to the third international conference over in Sweden, albeit it was 3 days there. I think I spent more time in the air, but it was certainly well worth going to see how far ahead other countries are compared with Australia. And I know we're a big country. We have 9,000 kilometres of roadway, but 900,000 kilometres of roadway, but that shouldn't be used as an excuse. We should approach the task head on, start looking at the rating systems of our roadways and working on innovation as well as education. And
you touched on something very briefly there too, with that first comment, Pat, about the thing that's often very rarely spoken about is the mental side or the mental illnesses that result in road trauma. We talk about fatalities and we talk about the physical injury, but for many people, it's that emotional trauma can be equally as devastating, if not more so, can't it?
Well, that's right, and it costs our economy billions of dollars a year. And for what we could invest into the road safety programs and into safe roads would save both the federal and state governments billions and billions of dollars. And that's something you don't hear about every year. The mental health side, I mean, I'm very lucky. I am relatively unscarred, but one thing that does really stick with me, and I remember it very vividly, was delivering a message to a mum and dad that their two daughters, twins, had been killed in a road accident. And just the reaction from them, that was one of the hardest days of my life and something that sticks with me. I don't want other first responders to have to do that, and I don't want mums and dads to have that message delivered to them.
Oh, look, absolutely, and you're right. It's when you have that personal experience, whether it is as a first responder, whether it's as a family member. I know for a lot of the people we talk at the foundation, talking about road trauma, the devastation that happens to those families is just horrendous. And I think it's what drives all of us to try and do something to try and change that, so that no other Australian family or individual has to go through that degree of trauma and grief. I guess to that end, Pat, the Senate committee is looking at this inquiry into road safety. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role there and what sort of things the committee or the inquiry is looking at?
Sure. Well, there was a report last year looking at the way the federal government was addressing road safety, and it found that there was a distinct lack of accountability. Now, the whole inquiry we have at the moment, it's a joint select committee on road safety. We're looking at those four areas of the safe system principles, as well as the need for an Office of Road Safety, the need for a joint select committee, and a bipartisan approach to approach road safety and reducing the road toll with, bipartisan and with a real attempt, not something that's seen to be as lip service, and really try and work towards zero.
Yeah. And Pat, I guess the key things, what sort of findings are we looking at, or what sort of things, has there been some things out of that inquiry that have surprised you or set new directional changes you think we should be looking at?
Well, there's a number of areas. What we've found mostly is there needs to be better data collection, better data sharing. And by doing that, we can target the most needy areas for road safety or safer roads. At the moment, there seems to be that distinct lack of data collection and sharing. What was pointed out quite aptly to me was when COVID-19 struck, we were able to collect data within a matter of weeks, almost down to the minute, because a vast amount of money was directed towards that because it was a pandemic. If we consider what a pandemic is, if you look at the numbers of deaths in Australia at the moment, just a little over 300, and as sad as all of them are, every year we have over 1,000 people. In fact, last year, nearly 1,200 people dying on our roads. So my view is we should be treating the road toll as a pandemic in itself and directing and funding money towards reducing that.
And you're right, you know, the COVID situation is, I guess, a really good example. It does show that as a nation we can make enormous change. We can do things that we, you know, haven't probably thought of doing before. If we explain to people why it's important, if they understand that and the structures there to support that, we can make massive change. So I would agree with you. I think that what we've seen from this last sort of 6 months or so, there's lessons that road safety can gravitate towards that. And I think one of the things I still remember hearing from a chap from the World Bank a number of years ago was that road safety really needed two things. It needed leadership, and it needed an improvement in the way we transfer information, and whether that's education or whether that's awareness or personal ownership. They're two critical things. So I think we're starting to see some aspects of that directional change and changing the narrative, I think, for how we as a nation have looked at road safety, because clearly, you know, since 1970, we've had a massive improvement in terms of fatalities, but we've still got those issues where people are still having, unfortunately, incidents that's going to claim their life or make them injured. Pat, anything else from a federal level that you wanted to add?
Just picking up on one thing you said, and it is in relation to a federal level. You talked about national leadership. With national leadership comes accountability. There must be accountability for the role. That's why I was very pleased to see in 2019 the Office of Road Safety. But there has to be targets. There must be KPIs, and there must be accountability for myself and my colleagues as to achieving those results. Otherwise, we're just going to be the mouse on the wheel and not attain those goals that we are striving for. I believe with this, the terms of reference from the inquiry and the work that we're doing and the people, the interested parties who are making submissions, I honestly believe we can move ahead and make some real inroads.
I would agree with that, Pat. And as I've mentioned before, I think, you know, that overarching umbrella nationally, you know, between the committee and the leadership at a federal level and the Office of Road Safety, it's something we haven't had in the road safety space, not to that sort of level of structure. So to have that sort of cohesion at a federal level, to be bringing in other stakeholders and generally seeking other input from those stakeholders, I think is a fantastic step in the right direction, and certainly we greatly valued the opportunity to be part of that discussion. Pat, I know you've got an enormously busy day as always as a federal politician, so we'll let you get back to those duties. But again, I want to thank you for joining us today for this webinar for Rural Road Safety Month. Thank you for your commitment and the committee's commitment to exploring road safety and creating that federal leadership. We greatly appreciate it, and it's sorely needed.
It's my pleasure, and thank you to yourself and the Australian Road Safety Foundation for the great work that you do, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Fantastic, Pat. Great to be with you, mate. We'll talk soon.
Cheers.
Thanks, mate. That was Pat Conaghan, the federal member for Cowper. Well, obviously, the Australian Road Safety Foundation can't do the work we do without the support of our sponsors and partners, and the proper programs that we try and run and we try and innovate with are very much part of that broader discussion about how do we bring more stakeholders to the table so that it's not just people thinking about government or police, but it's looking at people that are actually involved in road trauma and road safety from a diverse range of angles. As I mentioned, you know, our supporters are critical to us, and one of the key ones is Suncorp Insurance. Joining me on the line now is Dan Wilkinson. Dan is the Executive Portfolio Manager for CTP Insurance for Suncorp in Queensland. Dan, great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you too, Russell.
Mate, just tell me a little bit about why it's so important for Suncorp to support road safety the way they do.
There's a couple of reasons, Russell. So from an overarching perspective, we're a large financial services business And without thriving communities, we don't have a business. So we rely on the communities that we sell our products into to be viable and, like I say, thriving, because if they're not, then our products become far less relevant and people obviously just can't afford them. So thriving communities are absolutely vital to our business. The other aspect to that is that we are, I think, the largest private personal injury insurer in Australia. So we do see firsthand the impacts of road trauma. And it's probably one of those points that I think you and I have spoken a bit about, Russell, in the past around this idea of road trauma, that people do tend to kind of gravitate to what is like a fatality toll and the number of people who are killed on our roads every year, which is absolutely tragic. Don't get me wrong. It's a terrible, terrible statistic. But underneath that, there is a huge volume of people who are injured on our roads, and quite seriously injured, that never really make the news. They don't make the headlines. And for each one of those people, there are families and friends and workplaces and a whole range of people who are impacted by this one injury, which unfortunately just doesn't get conveyed on the news. But we do see this trauma every day, and it's not something that finishes when the news article finishes. These things can go on for years and years as they ripple right through our community. So we see programs like Rural Road Safety Month, and we've been involved with the Fatality Free Friday and with other initiatives that are run by Australian Road Safety Foundation as being so important, because just saving one person from a piece of road trauma actually has a huge impact on the broader community. So for us, these types of programs and initiatives are absolutely vital.
And Dan, you touched on a really interesting point there again, and you're 100% right. When we hear the road fatalities or we hear the road statistics, we tend to just think of either just that incident or just that one occurrence, but the ripple effect that goes on to that, and especially, as with the injury rates being what they are, we're seeing those sorts of things start to climb. Again, for every one fatality, there's between 20 and 30 people that are hospitalised and seriously injured, and those injuries can be a life sentence of a different nature, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I often say, Russell, is to try and put some things into perspective for people, because again, we hear the news stories, and while they can be quite shocking, we can kind of, I guess, be a little bit dismissive because we don't fully understand the impact of that. But I often say to people as well, so someone who let's say likes to keep active and do a bit of jogging or something like that, where they might have an injury out running, they might twist their ankle or pull a calf muscle or something like that, which is not something you're going to end up in hospital for. It's certainly not something that you or I would call life changing. But it can actually have a huge impact on your life. It makes getting around the house a bit difficult. We gripe along for a couple of days and that sort of thing. And I say to people, well, imagine if you had an injury that was big enough to put you in hospital, that you had to go and have an x-ray, you had to spend a night in hospital, and the impact that has on your life. And you say, well, now imagine that it was you or your wife or your son or your daughter that was hurt so badly that they were in hospital for a month. Like, you try to imagine the impact that has on people. And suddenly, if you can make it a bit more real with people, I think we do start to understand, saying, wow, we've actually got something really big that is happening to people every day here. And that's why, it's always very hard for us to tell, saying how effective are these programs. But I 100% believe, like, if it saves one person from having to go through that type of upheaval with their families and everything, it's completely worth it.
Absolutely. And you're 100% right. We simply don't know the people that we've saved, because someone's heard the message, they've adjusted their behaviour and have gone on to not become a headline or a statistic or have ended up in hospital. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes, I guess, judging road safety success sometimes a bit of a challenge, because success can occur in multiple different areas. You can have an improvement in one factor or one aspect of that. It may not necessarily be immediately, apparent to the people on the street, because again, it doesn't become a headline. It's something that's under the waterline, isn't it? Yeah,
and that's right. And for most of us, we would know someone who's had some kind of event that's been life-changing like that. I think part of the not the secret, I guess the challenge to breaking through that is to try and bring it back and make it more relevant for people as well, which I think is another one of these great things about Rural Road Safety Month as well, is that a lot of our road safety campaigns, and particularly ones that end up on TV, do focus a lot around kind of, I guess, driving in urban and built-up areas as well. You know, it's the classic car skidding near a pedestrian crossing, or, you know, speeding 70 kilometres an hour in a 60 zone, all really dangerous things. But it tends to kind of put it in very much an urban and built-up area context where so much of the trauma that we see is well outside our cities. And the two aspects of that, I guess, as well, is that it happens to people who live in the country, who are driving on those roads every day, and whether it is a momentary lapse in concentration or an animal jumping onto the road or something like that, it has big impacts. But there's also the factor of people who generally drive around the city, used to city driving in rural and regional areas, and just not being used to driving in those conditions.
So, Dan, would that really be the key message as far as Suncorp's concerned for Rural Road Safety Month? Think about personal responsibility?
Absolutely. And when we talk about, you know, the impact that we have on others as well, and that being very difficult, I think one thing, and one really great proactive thing that people can take out of this is, and reflecting upon myself, I grew up in regional New South Wales, and, you know, I could drive a car well before I actually got my licence, because we were out in paddocks driving and that sort of thing. But it didn't make me a good driver at all. But everything that I knew about driving on a car, I had learnt from my mum and dad, being in the car with them, often for a long time. And so the only insight I had on how you drive a car, your behaviour and attitudes, came from those two people. And fortunately for me, both of my parents were quite conservative and careful drivers. But I think had they been risk takers, I would have learnt that as being normal. So my message would be for people, absolutely get out and go and see our rural regional areas, because they need you out there right now. But do it knowing that not only are you driving for you, you're driving for the other people you've got in your car, and you're absolutely driving for people outside your car as well.
And that's actually probably a great example to almost wrap up on, is that we sometimes forget the example that we're setting for the next generation. And I know driving instructors often tell me that they're trying to unwind habits that quite often the kids have been watching demonstrated to them on a daily basis for 16 years or so, to then suddenly try and change that is really difficult. So you're right. I mean, having a different narrative to think about the example that we're setting, apart from the risk and the other things that we're trying to avoid, but that example is also such a critical thing for that next generation, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm certainly not sitting here preaching to you as well. I know from my own experience with my own daughter, who's trying to get her licence at the moment, is mad keen to get a manual licence, and her driving instructor said to her the other day, I don't know where you got that habit of leaving your hand on the gear stick from, but it needs to go. And unfortunately, I need to look in the mirror, because I know exactly where she got that habit from, and I don't know how I got the habit, but I did, and I've passed it on to her already. So, you know, it's absolutely, it works. Your behaviour in the car does work to impact the next generation.
And you're right, mate. I think, and that's part of the dialogue we want to try and have, I think, as a nation, to look at there's always another level, and there's always more coaching that can be done. So, and of course, too, education campaigns, just sharing those stories also can start to change that narrative around the country. So, Dan, as always, great to talk to you, my friend. We really appreciate your support. Certainly appreciate the support that Suncorp gives us and allows us to do the work we do. Please stay safe, my friend. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you very much for all the work you guys do too. It's very much appreciated from my heart and my family's heart as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. All the best, mate. Speak soon.
Will do.
Dan Wilkinson there from Suncorp Insurance. One of the key messages we're always aiming to communicate is that our actions have consequences. We use roads daily, whether as a pedestrian, a cyclist, a rider or a driver. And we need to understand that each of those road user groups face different challenges and risks. As road users, we all have a responsibility to think more about our actions and how those actions may impact other people, not just ourselves. Crashes can occur when something unexpected happens. The problem is that because we use the roads every day, we can develop a general complacency to the risk. But a crash can have devastating consequences and impacts to those involved, their families, their friends, the community, and for the families, that pain lasts forever. Michelle Underhill and her family have experienced the tragic loss that can result from a road crash. Let's hear from Michelle as she shares her story and the ripple effect that continues to affect them every single day.
I had come home that day early from work to wrap some Christmas presents for the kids. A few sirens had gone past the back fence. I checked Facebook for the local information page to see there was a description of a car similar to the one that our babysitter had used at the time. My husband and I rushed down to the scene. I was running out of the car across bits and pieces of broken glass because the car had basically exploded into two pieces, and I remember running to the front end of the car, and a young man had driven past and he said, "Are you her mum?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm so sorry, I tried everything that I could." And later on I realised that he meant that he'd attempted CPR on Elle and he couldn't revive her. And I think that that is so traumatic for me as well as the person that was driving the car. And one man had said that she had the most beautiful blue eyes and that he just watched the colour drain out of them. And I think that really affects me daily, so I can only imagine what effect it has had on him and the rest of the emergency services that had to deal with that confronting scenes. So I don't think anybody goes out and makes a decision that they're going to go out and cause a collision and the death of somebody. If you allow yourself to become that distracted on a road, you are going to end up with a deadly consequence, and that's really something that people don't think of, you know? They've driven this road 1,000 times. Elle was a very giving, loving child and would do anything for anybody, and she was so vibrant and so passionate and so kind to everybody that I feel that this message of road safety and being safe on the roads needs to be brought across, because I want her story to touch as many lives as possible to change their behaviour. You know, you have a responsibility on the road to make sure that you are safe and that the other road users are safe.
Clearly, Michelle's story is a tragic one, and certainly one that I think any parent would understand it would just be a horrific experience to go through. It's one of the things when we hear stories like that just continues to, I guess, focus the Australian Road Safety Foundation's resolve to do everything we can to try and prevent other people going through what Michelle and her family have gone through. And we thank her for her courage in sharing her story, and certainly still send our thoughts and prayers to her and her family as they continue to deal with the tragic loss of their daughter Elle. It's also important, I think, to talk about what happens when you're actually confronted with a crash in a rural road setting, and to talk about, I guess, the impacts that happen clearly not only to the people that are involved in the incident themselves, but certainly the first responders. There's no doubt they face the most harrowing and the most difficult of jobs when they arrive at a scene for the first time and see the devastation that could potentially be literally littered across the road in front of them. Joining us now is Nick Bell. Nick's a former watch commander for fire and rescue operations. He's seen very much at the coalface and has seen how these sort of instances can just be not only terribly tragic for the family, but also for the first responders. Nick, thanks for joining us today for the Rural Road Safety Month webinar. It's great to see you, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Russell, for the invitation.
Mate, tell us just a little bit more about your background, because it's an intriguing and I guess a very long career in this field.
It has been. It's been a wonderful time. Up until the 5th of March this year, I was an operational watch commander with the Northern Territory Fire and Rescue Service. And watch commander, my job was to respond to and take operational command of critical incidents. These included road crash rescue, road trauma incidents, truck rollovers, hazardous material spills, cliff rescues, structure fires, and these sorts of incidents. And my job was to go and coordinate all of the resources on the ground there, take operational command, and make these critical decisions to bring these incidents to successful conclusions.
And I guess when you first arrive at a scene, or when you get the call that there's a crash in a rural area, what sort of things start going through your mind, or how do you start to prepare, I guess, mentally for what you might be dealing with when you arrive?
Well, let me put you into the mind of an operational incident commander. My thoughts I break them into two parts. One is the operational side of things, and as I'm responding, I'm saying, where is this incident? I know it's high speed because you know some of the roads, you know that there would be, high impact, high speed, you know that there'd be 2 or more people involved. You start to sort of plan, if you like, for success and work backwards from there. What resources am I going to require? What other agencies will I need on scene? Of course, police and ambulance are notified as a matter of course. Then there's the other side of it, and I won't lie to you, every single job that I went to, my heart was beating, my palms were sweating, and absolutely I'd get a tension headache, because I know that whatever job I was going to, you would be confronted with scenes that everyone was new and everyone was different. There's no two the same. All of these critical incidents are ambiguous by nature, given their type. And as you were approaching the scene, you had a feeling of dread, if you like. As I slowed down and turned the siren off but left the lights on, there was always this moment. You had about a minute or two where you would sight my vehicle and where I would put it on the road, and then I could see from past experience how I knew that we were dealing with fatalities, and a lot of the times the information would come that we were dealing with fatalities to start off with. So it was really tough stuff, tough day at the office. I will say one caveat is that I did sign up for the job, and so I take responsibility for that, but that does not lessen it by any means.
And Nick, I guess the other thing that's important too is that even though, and I guess there's probably almost a time when you're just doing the work and doing what you have to do on site. What's the aftermath from a first responder standpoint? Is because we talk obviously about the ripple effect, and clearly something that's probably not spoken about very much is what those first responders go through in the hours after, the days, weeks, months, even years after an incident that they've had to address.
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, the aftermath starts from the moment the paramedic declares the person deceased. And I think what happens is that critical incident first responders are involved in a very, very intimate way with these accidents. So we have the person's blood on us, and sometimes, there are body parts and so on around. And so there's this confrontation, but we're very close to this. We're trying to extract victims. We're trying to work on the paramedics are trying to preserve life. We're trying to extract them. Police are trying to assist us and trying to, block roads. There's this intimate involvement with carnage, trauma, and chaos. And so what happens is, and without being too melodramatic, you're now extracting yourself from it. So I always sort of talk about stepping back and letting go. And it's the point where the paramedics who are on scene declare the person deceased, because we don't declare them that. I mean, the paramedics declare. And we have to step back and let go. Even though we are working on this person, we have to realise that this has now come to a conclusion. It's now a body recovery. And so stepping back was always an incredibly difficult thing to do, because you were so invested in it. And I always say to people that it's never the amount of time you spend with someone. You can spend 20 years with someone and never make a connection, but you can spend those 3, 4, 5, 20 minutes, 30 minutes with someone in that intimate moment where they're losing their life, and having to step back and let go of them is a really psychologically, it was very, very tough for all of us. And I always remember the crunching of the glass and the metal, and so as you step back and you're having to let go, and you're having to realise that this is it. So that's the immediate aftermath. But then after that is the processing of what you've seen, what you've heard, felt, smelt. I'm remembering in these critical incidents, Russell, that our senses are heightened, and then so we absorb these incidents into every, it seems like into every pore of our body, if that makes sense, every cell in our body, and then having to let go and process that.
And Nick, obviously you've worked a lot in rural and remote areas, and I guess the other thing, of course, too, is that the population are pretty tightly knit around those areas, and of course it could be someone who you know, or somebody you might live next door to, or who's a colleague of some description, isn't it?
Well, therein lies the challenge. Of course, you would be working on someone that you know, that you've had interactions with previously, or they're a family member of someone that you know. So I was very fortunate that I didn't go to any family member that I knew, but I knew friends' family members that were deceased, and I was there working on them. And I would wait, of course, till the police had notified them, and then I would ring them and say, listen, I was there, and I would go and talk to them and say, look, we did the best we could. I think, Russell, the thing is where you let go is that you say, well, if I can't save their life, or we didn't get them out in time, can we give them back to their families with the greatest dignity and respect that we can, so that the families can say goodbye? And that gave some level of closure for the whole crew as well. There was still meaning after death, if that makes sense.
Mate, it's just such an incredible job that you and every other emergency response person does around the country. And I think, hearing your story, and along with Michelle's, again, it takes it away from just the number or the news flash we might hear in a news bulletin, to actually translate that into people. And I think that's a critical shift we've got to make. What sort of other things do you think we could do, like as part of Rural Road Safety Month? How do we better educate people? How do we get more people to understand that those simple choices they might make, or that little bit of apathy they might have, or complacency, could ultimately cost somebody their life?
Well, there's a couple of things for me that I tell you, when I talk to people, I don't pull any punches. I mean, this is not a time, because this is a road pandemic by any other means. What I try and do is I personalise these things for people, and I try to reach them on a personal level. Now, statistics will only get you so far, and they're incredibly important for reporting purposes and for people understanding, that it can easily happen to them. But to personalise it is where it's really at. And I say to people that remember that these messages like August Road Safety Month, Rural Road Safety Month, and any messages that the Australian Road Safety Foundation puts out there, these are not messages as such, but these are the screams and the cries from the hearts and the mouths of those that have innocently lost their lives. Now, I have been to so many critical incidents. Whilst I remember the fatalities with great clarity, the trouble is that these people who were innocent, and the very last one I went to in the fire service before I left, the very last one was a completely innocent woman. And these messages are cries and screams from the hearts and the mouths of the people who have lost their lives, and that now lie in the graveyards senselessly. Because, somebody, Russell, I was thinking about this before today, and I was thinking that the vast majority of critical incidents that I went to were man-made. They were. I mean, look, sometimes there's been mechanical failures and so on, but that's very, very rare. And the reality is that all the ones that I followed up and looked at, and the findings were man-made. And therefore, by extension, if we reverse engineer that, we can see that the decisions we make when we put the key into the ignition, it starts and it finishes there. And if you don't listen to me, then listen to the screams and the cries from the children. Remember the children.
Nick, you've summed that up really beautifully, my friend, and I think, again, it's a really powerful reminder of just how our choices can make a huge difference, the personal responsibility that we all have. And again, regardless of how we're using the road, it's understanding that we have a responsibility. We need to watch out for the children, as you said, and also anyone who's in that vulnerable road category group. It's absolutely critical. Nick, I could talk to you for hours, my friend. I greatly appreciate your passion. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us on Rural Road Safety Month.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I just want people to listen carefully to these messages, and I want them to remember the children. And thank you very much to the Australian Road Safety Foundation for the great work that you do, and that's why I support them.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Thanks, mate. Well, our next presenter is Ali Barclay. Ali is the State Coordinator for South Australia for the Party program. Ali, thanks so much for joining us here on Rural Road Safety Month. Tell us a little bit about what the Party program does.
So Party stands for Prevent Alcohol and Risk-Related Trauma in Youth. It was a program that initiated in Canada by a trauma nurse there who was essentially wanted to change how much trauma she was seeing come through her emergency room. We've been running the program here in South Australia for the last 5 years now. It's an in-hospital program generally where we get students to come to the hospital and we give them a day that teaches them about risk, choices and consequences by taking them through the emergency department, taking through the intensive care unit, teaching them about rehabilitation and essentially the consequences of the choices that they're making. At the moment, we are unable to run that in the hospital due to COVID, so we've actually transformed our program. We're going out to schools and taking our messages of trauma prevention out to schools.
What's some of the feedback you get from the kids as they experience any of those visits? Is it something that there's a shock that they sort of didn't realise that things could happen so badly on the road?
Yeah, so one of the first things we tell them is that 75% of the traumas that happen in their age group, and we target the 15 to 25-year-old age group, 75% of that trauma is classed as it's preventable. So that's one thing that really does surprise them. And then so we sort of challenge them through the day to think about how they can make choices and decisions to affect that change.
And I guess that process that they go through, it's about seeing, I guess, firsthand just some of the trauma that people sustain as a result of an injury. Obviously, on top of any fatality that's occurred, it's a lifelong sentence that sometimes those people face as well.
That's right. So we sort of try and incorporate personal stories. Everyone that presents on the program is an emergency nurse in the morning. So we go through the day and we talk to them about our experiences with patients, with families, with people that survive, people that don't. And then we do a scenario with them. We actually get them to help us look after a patient who is someone that was a real case. We use a real example, and then we get them to help us look after that patient. And we make that as vividly real as possible. Obviously, in the school, it's a little harder. We would normally be doing that in the emergency department and the intensive care unit. And this patient actually deteriorates and essentially dies. So we get them to perform CPR. We have discussions with them about the links that we would go to try and save the patient's life. And then we have a discussion about the effects of that patient losing their life, the people that are in the waiting room. And we talk to them about that. And often it sparks a lot of conversation about how we deal with those things and sorts of things we see. And it really does make them think a little bit more about how they can prevent that happening to themselves or someone else or someone they don't even know.
Ali, just finally, why do you think it's so critical that we keep campaigning, and especially, I guess, not just for a specific topic, but trying to educate people more broadly about the risks that we face on our roads?
Look, I believe that there will never be enough awareness, enough programs that bring awareness. It's quite obvious in the number of lives lost on the road, there's still work to be done. I think we're all responsible for that as road users, as in my situation, clinicians, and just as members of the society. So I think that we just need to continue with the awareness, continue supporting foundations such as yours to keep getting the messages out there until people really understand the depth and the effect that road trauma can have on themselves or someone else.
And you're so right. Again, we talk about this ripple effect all the time, and if we look at the injuries as one aspect, the rural scenario is another aspect, the young people, the level of trauma that's sustained from right across the country. It's such a diverse problem, such a challenging problem with many facets. So you're 100% right. The more we have a multifaceted approach to it, all sharing the same sort of message, but maybe from different angles, we can all make a huge difference. Ali, thank you so much for your time on the program today, and obviously continue to do the great work that you do with the Party program. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the forum that you provide us to speak on. Thanks, you very
Ali.
much. Thanks.
No worries at all. Thank you. That was Ali Barclay there. She's the State Coordinator for the Party program in South Australia. Well, what's really important from a road safety perspective is that we continue to broaden the narrative, have more people sharing their stories and sharing their insights, and having ambassadors to really become part of the road safety family. And I'm really pleased that the Australian Road Safety Foundation has had some fantastic support from two Australian sporting legends. Firstly, Laura Geitz, the netball legend and Suncorp ambassador. Laura, thank you so much for being with us today. And also Craig Lowndes, Australian Road Safety Foundation Ambassador and also Caltex Ambassador. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here for Rural Road Safety Month. This webinar is really important. I want to just maybe start by getting your insights, maybe from each of you, maybe Laura if you go first, but maybe your insights as to why road safety is passionate for you or is a passionate topic for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously any opportunity to talk about the importance and raise awareness, I jumped at the opportunity to be involved, and particularly the Rural Road Safety Month, I think has a bit of a close connection to me. I grew up in the country. And, as a kid, you're fearless, and jumping in the car is just something that you do. And I often remember Mum saying to me when she used to actually drive me from Allara to Brisbane for netball, which is about a 2.5 hour trip, she used to get really nervous about, the oncoming semi-trailers and all the other traffic on the road. And I used to think as a kid, why does it bother you so much? And now I have those exact concerns when I jump in the car, and particularly drive on rural roads. I think, single lanes, 100 kilometres per hour. And I think the underlying reason is now I'm a mother and I travel with children in the car. And I think when you do become a mother, your instincts and protectiveness definitely goes up a few levels. So I think, that's for me, I now understand, how concerning and how scary sometimes it can be to jump in the car. And it's horrible when you hear about the stories that happen. And as far as I'm concerned, we hear about it too much. I don't do a lot of country driving now, but I think when I do head back home, it's definitely something that's in the back of your mind when you jump in the car.
And Craig, for you as well, mate, I guess same thing. There's a world of experience that you've had. Maybe tell us a little bit about your thoughts on rural road safety.
Yeah, I suppose it's very similar. I suppose I grew up in the country in Victoria and then, of course, migrated up here into Queensland. But it's one of those things that I spent my whole life in an environment that trying to be safer, better, stronger, faster as a race driver. And I think that I've seen a lot of things that have gone on over my course of when I've been a full-time driver about the safety side of it. And I guess the difference between a race car, racetrack, and then migrating back to the general road, for me, it's really important to get that message across that what we do in a race car is one thing, but when you get on a public road, and we've talked about this, that I'm more worried and scared being on a public road than I am being on a racetrack because of all the environment that's around you that you don't have on a racetrack. School zones, pedestrian crossings, roundabouts, anything and everything that can sort of jump out in front of you at any given time. So for me to be able to be part of what you stand for in the road safety side of it is really important to get that message across and to educate people that we all have a role in to play with this. It's something that's it's not just up to us to do it. It's up to everyone to be part of the program to have road safety and Fatality Free Friday has been a fantastic vehicle for that side of it. If we can get one day, and as you've always mentioned, if we can get one day, then we can work on more and hopefully have a whole year of no fatalities.
And Craig, you touched on something there about motorsport. I mean, it's designed to, if a vehicle does leave the track, there's emergency response right there. There's runoff area right there. The cars are sort of built for that. We don't have that same luxury in a rural setting, do we?
No, and I think that the rural side of it is more, obviously the distance between towns to town is obviously vast. So, the time frame from having an incident or an accident to that safety vehicles and people to get to you is obviously longer. So it is really important that the rural people understand that side of it. And for me, it's always been one of those things that I love going to the country and basically educating the people that, being in the country is very different to being in the city because of the long distance and durations between towns, or even people just on farms that go from one end of their farms to another. Like it could be kilometres away. So it really is important to try and educate people that side of it. Of course, fatigue, everything else, just being ready and prepared for any conditions that pop in front of you.
And Laura, you made a point before, but you would have oncoming vehicles and sometimes very large ones. You're literally separated by a white line, and I guess stepping over a white line in netball, there's going to be a penalty to that, but stepping over a white line on a road sense can be catastrophic, can't it?
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing, and Craig touched on it as well, is probably if you relate it back to a sporting background, you train so much to control situations and to individually be in control. And, when you're playing against another team, they throw something at you, you react quickly and you've got a plan, but it's a different case on the roads. There are so many things, that person that's oncoming, you're hoping if it's a truck driver or whoever it is that they're not tied behind the wheel. They haven't been drink driving. The amount of people that you pass in a 2.5 hour road trip can be so many, and to know, you have no idea what that person behind the other wheel is feeling or who they are. So as you mentioned, it's a very fine line, between the space between you and them. And it's why you've just got to be so alert. And I think that's the other thing too, when you've got kids in the back of the car and they're screaming out to you, or they're hungry, or they're crying, there can be so many different distractions. So I think the thing is, we're all busy people. We're all in a rush. I think COVID's been the only thing that's stopped us a little bit in, the last few months. And I think it's just really important to go, well, if it's going to take me 2.5 hours to get there, I have to give myself 3 or longer. You have to be prepared and you have to be alert. And you have to know that every time you get in the car, it's actually a really big risk. You're not putting yourself at danger, but you've also got the people in the car, the people that are on the road as well. So there's so many uncontrollables out there. And, I think just to be aware of that every time you jump in the car is really important.
And guys, I think for all three of us, we've all had our formative years in a rural region. Clearly, if there's an impact, or if there's a crash that occurs in those regional areas, and again, I know from experience, the shockwave of that incident happening just goes far beyond the immediate people involved. It's the family and can ultimately be the whole community, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. That ripple effect is massive, and I don't think people appreciate that what goes on, post just that incident that they see inside or in front of them. It's everyone, as you said, the family members. It's it's the other cars members. It is that ripple effect that it just carries on down the line, and for a lot of people, they just don't appreciate that side of it.
Laura, would you say the same thing? Is it you mentioned it before, is it like a discipline that we just don't seem to, for most people, we tend to underestimate what that risk might be?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think it's something that is so common for us. We do it every day. We jump in our cars, we, drive to the shops. We, as I mentioned, we're busy people. We're always here, there, everywhere. We're dropping kids off at school, we're picking them up. There's so many risks attached to it. And I think, again, as you both have mentioned, Fatality Free Friday just raises so much awareness about, okay, well, today's a day that, we've got to be extra careful. But really that sense should probably be every single time we get into a car. And, if we can make it that day, if we can make it 2 days, if we can, just really drop the numbers of people that are injured or, unfortunately, the fatalities on the road. It's something that I think is exceptionally important.
Absolutely. Craig, I guess just in a wrap up as a Caltex ambassador, what would be your message to people driving everywhere, but certainly on Rural Road Safety Month?
Well, yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think the people in the rural areas that, and I was staggered to read these numbers, and I think you sent them through to me, that, they do become a little bit complacent because they think that they're invincible and they're away from everyone else, that they're more obliging to break the road rules, and the road rules are there for a reason, for the conditions of the roads, for the the bend that's coming up in front of them, that the estimated speed. They think that they're going to be better than that. It really is something that is staggering. But the message for me is to take the pledge, but then live the pledge. Like, it's one of those things that it's easy enough to get online and take the pledge, but you got to live it. You've got to be strong enough to stand up. And if you're a passenger in a car that you're not feeling safe because of that driver's either speeding, reckless, been drinking, whatever, to talk up, speak up, and actually get out of that vehicle, get out of that danger zone, because it's a privilege to have a license. For me, it's something that I've been lucky enough that I've learned along the way through motor racing, all the, I suppose, the effects of what goes on in an incident. And, for me, it's take the pledge, but live the pledge.
And Laura, from your standpoint as a Suncorp ambassador, what would your words be?
Exactly the same words as Craig. I think it's all of us taking the pledge and living the pledge every single day of our lives. If it's, a 5-minute road trip down the road, or if it's a 2-hour road trip, it's every single time you get in that car, you are alert, you are you are 100% focused. We're not checking our phones. We're not a part of any of those distractions, which, it happens so much. You pull up at a set of lights and everyone thinks it's, the time to check their messages or, and it's so easily done. I understand that. But, this is what I think it has to come to, is that when you take that pledge, your full concentration is on the task ahead, and that's being in the road, and that's keeping everyone in your car safe and everyone else around you safe.
And that's actually a really great point. I think for obviously the experience that both of you had, whether that's in motorsport or on a netball court, when you're in that zone, you're there for one job and your focus is completely on that. And for really what's the most dangerous thing that the average person will do on a daily basis, we tend not to do that as human beings. We tend to underestimate that risk. And Laura, as you said, people are, sort of either using a mobile phone, or they're being distracted by some other means, or they're choosing to do the wrong thing. So you're both 100% right in that sense, that you need that sporting discipline. And we've got to maybe think of it more like that to start to change that narrative, that we just can't afford to be complacent with it. Guys, I want to thank you so much for your time. Craig, I know you've got a busy time as always, and Laura, I know, again, busy time for you as well, certainly as always is, but even more so in these most recent times. So we greatly value your time today. We certainly greatly value your ongoing support and helping us to get the message out to choose road safety. So thanks again for your time, guys, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Russell.
Thanks, guys. Craig Lowndes and Laura Geitz, two legends of Australian sport and two great road safety ambassadors. We certainly thank them for joining us today. While dangerous road behaviours occur less frequently in rural areas compared to city streets, more fatalities happen in regional areas. This just goes to show how even one dangerous choice can have grave consequences. So it's imperative that all Australians, drivers, both regional and city-based, take ownership of their role in reducing the road toll. While there are a number of factors that contribute to this toll, it's everyday Australians that hold the key to safer roads. Whilst we always need to improve road safety, road infrastructure, vehicle safety, emergency response and enforcement, we also need to look for new innovations to help improve road user education. As a community, we need to consciously and actively role model safer road choices and behaviours in order to educate our youth and inspire behavioural change for safer outcomes, ultimately striving to reduce the impacts of road trauma and saving lives. As part of this approach, the Australian Road Safety Foundation has launched RoadSet, a free online interactive learning experience and educational tool aimed at Year 9 students. It's designed to help young people become better and safer road users and ultimately making Australian roads safer for everyone. Today and every day, we ask all Australians to take the pledge to choose road safety. Demonstrate your commitment to reducing the nation's road toll and live the pledge for your family, your friends and for your community. Take the pledge online at arsf.com.au. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for joining us today. Nick Bell and Ali Barclay, Craig Lowndes and Laura Geitz, as well as Dan Wilkinson and Pat Conahan. Thank you also to our partners for their continued support and their commitment to improving road safety. Special thanks to Caltex, Suncorp and the Australian Government, as well as Subaru, PPQ and MyPlates. Well, that concludes the session for today. On behalf of the Australian Road Safety Foundation, I want to thank you for being part of today's session. For further information, or if you want to have any other questions answered, please contact us at arsf.com.au. Until next time, drive safely.
Here's a scary fact. People driving on regional and remote roads are at greater risk.
2/3 of road fatalities in Australia occur on rural roads.
The leading causes: speed, fatigue and drunk driving.
Research tells us that city and country people are more likely to break the road rules on country roads.
So, what can you do?
Take the pledge to choose road safety
And live the pledge.
Head to arsf.com.au to find out more.